The objective for today is to just give a broad overview of SRA's early interventions in reading, and specifically we're going to focus on the second level of that series, of which there's a total of 3 levels. There's a foundation level, a level 1, and then the focus we're going to take today is on the top level, which was designed specifically for children who are entering 2nd grade or above, a little behind. And so let me pull up my PowerPoint, and we're gonna, let's see, it just went to full screen, so I need to back it up. Are you, let's see, first I need to share my screen. Do I have the ability to take over? Yes, okay. So are you seeing that? Are you seeing my screen?
We are.
Okay, just want to make sure before I start off and have everybody going, I can't see anything. All right, so let's start it from the beginning. Okay, so we're going to focus in on level 2 of this curriculum, which is designed, as I was just saying, really for older students, and older in our definition means students after 1st grade. And this particular curriculum has real utility in our current system with everybody. We have a lot of 1st and 2nd and 3rd graders, well, every grade obviously, but in particular the 1st grade students that miss the end of 1st grade, which, as we all know, is such a critical time for getting up and it's a major point of what I consider like a blast off to literacy, and these kids have missed it largely. And I know there's been online education and teachers have done the best they can, but I think we all know that for this particular age group, you need to be sitting in front of them and really helping them, at least for a good chunk of these kids who you don't just learn to read over online with somebody reading a storybook or something to you. So my guess is going to be that next year in 2nd grade, many of us will be facing a whole cadre of 1st graders or former 1st graders who are now 2nd graders but didn't achieve what they needed to achieve, more so than normal, because so many of the kids missed the second 2 or 3 months of school in terms of what they really needed. So this particular curriculum was specifically designed for students who were leaving 1st grade not achieving the outcomes that we want for all 1st graders, but who weren't completely at ground zero. So we're looking at a student who has achieved mastery of what we would typically consider maybe middle of 1st grade. They're not non-readers. They have some set of skills, but they're not where they need to be going into 2nd grade. And of course, this is also completely relevant for children in 3rd, 4th, and beyond who are also in that same level. But for those students that are entering in 2nd grade in particular, and also 3rd grade, this curriculum is particularly relevant, and here's why. It takes a student who's reading at approximately middle-ish, upper 1st grade, in that middle of 1st grade ability, and moves them in a year or 120 lessons to having mastery of what we consider 4th grade skill level. So they're ready to go right into 4th grade. So if you've got 2nd graders, they're going to be ahead of grade level by the end of this program. They're going to be reading at a level associated with higher than 3rd grade reading. And if they're 3rd graders right now, they should be perfectly on level to go right into 4th grade. And so that's why this curriculum was specifically designed to accelerate learning. It was also designed specifically for the older reader. And I know 2nd graders really aren't older, but it was also designed that it could be used with 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th graders. So it was designed when you get into the curriculum to have a more mature look or feel. And instead of using cute little storybooks, I mean, we obviously like that, but if we're working with older students, in particular, it uses chapter books. The younger children are very excited by chapter books, of course, and you can see in the picture there the children are reading from, I mean, essentially novels. So it makes the older student, if they're working with older students, they don't feel embarrassed that they're in this curriculum, and the younger student feels pride that they're reading chapter books and big books for big, the big kids. So, and we have used this curriculum in our research in specifically with second language learners and students who are struggling in second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh grades in some of our research. So here's the basic skill levels that children should be able to do to go into this level versus level 1. Now, I will tell you that it's not so important that you know who is who at the beginning of the school year, because there is a placement test. So if you've got a cadre of kids in first, second, third, fourth grade, and you're not really sure if they should go into level 1 or level 2, the placement test will give you that information, and you're going to be able to place kids into achievement groups together. But in terms of what a child should be able to do to go into this level, they should be reading most single syllable words. So they've got their basic CBCs and stuff. They know probably most of their letter sound correspondences, although they may be a little shaky on some of them. However, they're probably not able to fully discriminate between, like, when it's a long vowel or a short vowel with an E on the end. That gets additional work in this level. They are able to read some multisyllabics, but they're probably struggling. And of course, if you recognize kids at the upper grades, that's universally one of their biggest problems, is the multisyllabic words. Their fluency is below where their benchmark should be, but they are reading. So they're not a non-reader, but they're still that struggling reader. They also probably have poor vocabulary, and that's particularly true if they are coming from a lower socioeconomic background. Poor vocabulary is, if they have, or their second language learners, if they have poor vocabulary, this program will address that. If their vocabulary is on benchmark, it will still improve their vocabulary, because there's a large emphasis on teaching morphographic information, which helps all kids. Morphographs being, like prefixes, suffixes, and parts of words that carry meaning. Okay, so that's sort of the big picture. And again, there are 3 levels of this curriculum, but the second level is really focused on getting these kids where they need to be in terms of fluency, reading multisyllabic words, which of course facilitates fluency, and their comprehension and vocabulary. So it's a more advanced. The first level, level 1, really focuses more on getting kids up with word reading. That's the focus there. And then there's a foundation level that's really more phonemic awareness and such. Okay, so again, just to review, well, just to get the idea here, we're moving kids that are probably in the late middle-ish grade 1 ability. And so if we're talking about our kids who missed the end of first grade, that's probably all of them, except for the ones that were advanced when all of this COVID crisis began. And by the end of this curriculum, after 120 lessons, if they've mastered all the things along, and the curriculum is designed to ensure mastery. So if the students are mastering every lesson along the way, as it's designed, you'll have a student who, if they're a second grader, is now reading advanced, and if they're a third grader, they're reading right where they're supposed to be. And so ultimately what you have are a set of students who are now well prepared for the literacy demands of the upper grades. And just for your background, I was a classroom teacher, and I've worked in lots and lots of classrooms, and I get it. I've seen it's such a struggle for teachers to work with students. How are you supposed to teach science or whatever the classroom demands are if the kids really can't read the textbook? And I see so many teachers that don't even assign the textbook because the kids can't read it, which then leads to this cascade of, it's sort of a snowball. They're not assigned because they can't, and then they never get what they need. So it's a big issue. So we're trying to shore up these issues to make sure these kids can read their textbooks. Having said that, the emphasis of the type of text that students read in this particular curriculum is focused on textbook reading. So the novels are narrative. They're mostly narrative, but historically accurate kinds of stories. So they read stories about like how the light bulb was developed, or there's all kinds of different stories about places and inventions and things. So there's a social studies kind of a focus. We also do a sort of a trip around the world where they read stories about kids and places in different locations around the globe. We look at the globe before they read it. So there's an infusion of building background knowledge so it's more than just basic reading words and comprehension. We're also trying to build a foundation of knowledge that will facilitate other content areas. So there's some content focused, mostly social studies. There's also woven into that some science knowledge as well. And as they're reading their stories, they're also learning content, and that then will help them in their content area reading. And we do know that in the upper grades, and upper grade to me is any grade after second grade. Really, I guess fourth grade is really where we start talking about it being upper grades. The upper middle and upper grades, 90% of what kids do at school is expository. So that's one of the reasons we really took an expository focus for here. There is narrative text, but there's a much larger expository focus than in the typical reading program. Okay, so in terms of the way this curriculum was designed, it was designed it's very explicit and very systematic, but it's also very clearly laid out for the teacher. And this facilitates two things. So if the teachers that are teaching these kids are not as expert as perhaps they would prefer to be in order to work well with these kids that are struggling a little bit, if they don't have that knowledge base that is really required in order to teach students like this really well, the curriculum sort of bridges the gap for them. It's laid out, all the lessons. I mean, we basically had a team of researchers designing every lesson. It's really not possible, I don't think, for a teacher who's doing the myriad tasks that a teacher does every day to sit down and carefully lay out a lesson plan as meticulously as these lesson plans were laid out. And the number of hours that were poured into every lesson before SRA McGraw-Hill ever got it. And actually, our team of researchers, led by me, laid out these lesson plans. We developed these lessons. We delivered them to students in research projects before we ever allowed them to be printed up and sold by SRA McGraw-Hill. So that was part of our commitment to make sure things that were put out in the market actually have some efficacy. So there was a NIH research and US Department of Education research that went into these lessons where we did randomized control trials before they ever were made available. It took us, I think, Lindsay, we spent about 5 years before we let you guys have it. So anyway, so we did all that work on the front end. So everything is laid out for the teacher. It's very well laid out for the teacher who is truly expert and could do this on their own. What I hear from those teachers who, like you're reading, those people who are truly, they have the reading specialist degrees and such, those teachers really appreciate the fact that the lessons are so well laid out so they don't have to spend so many hours doing it, figuring out what to do next because it's laid out. But those teachers tend to understand how it's laid out and see the value. And the less expert teachers actually learn a lot about how to teach these more advanced skills by going through the curriculum. So it's a win-win. But it's not done in a disrespectful way, but it is scripted out for the teachers. These lessons were very carefully designed to make sure that anything that is new in the lesson, all the prerequisite skills have already been done. So kids aren't hit with, if there's something new being presented in a lesson, you have the assurance that the kids should have the prerequisite skills. And if there is a challenge point for a particular student, it's not such a gap. The ability to scaffold that kid and get them where they need to be is much easier because most of the pieces are there. Also, we make sure there's a very careful process of cumulatively reviewing, so that if something was taught, it's not just dropped and then the kids forget it, because we all know, we know that these kids do tend to forget. And so there's a lot of cumulative reviewing, and reading by its nature actually does build in some cumulative there. We were very careful to make sure that any possible confusions were reduced, and that this then leads to a reduction in errors. And so one of our goals is to make sure kids aren't practicing errors and that they have the skills they need to get to the next step. The other piece was that students are always actively academically engaged, and that's done by the teacher, there's a lot less teacher talk and a lot more student talk. And the teacher will say a little bit and then ask the student. Sometimes it's just repeat back what I said. Sometimes it's giving me the next answer, but there's a lot more interchange between the teachers and the students than what you typically see. The next piece is that there's a constant measuring mastery, and there's we have a mastery checkoff sheet, and that sort of reminds the teacher to always be monitoring. And if a student didn't master something on a particular day, the teacher knows to go back and hit that again. And so there's really an emphasis on constant teaching to mastery. And when you put these things together, what happens is that students actually do have mastery and they continue forward, and at the end of the day, they have better outcomes. We also have done what's called critical content. So that means what is taught hard, taught repetitively, but it's not covering the world. We're covering the things that are critical to ensure that students become really good readers. So it's an integrated curriculum of the critical reading skills. And so we're not trying to cover the world. And so we're not saying that this is any entire reading program, but in terms of getting kids reading sentences and words with fluency and comprehension and being able to operate on that text, this will get you where you need to be, where those kids need to be, the critical pieces. So the overall curriculum really takes a hard focus on making sure kids can read multisyllabic words. And any word they come across, they have the strategy, no matter how big the word is, they're not freaked out. They can have, 6-syllable words, and they're able to see the chunks and work at it at a syllable at a time and put it together. There's a real focus on fluency. Every lesson has a fluency goal, and the teacher is constantly checking at least one student every day herself, and then they do a partner reading with the students that are not being checked by the teacher. There's a focus on both decoding and encoding or spelling. And we find there's really solid research that when you teach students to encode or focus on spelling as well as decoding, those two things, you end up with a student who really, they can do both. They can read basically any word and encode. There is also a major focus on vocabulary, as I've already said. The way we focus on vocabulary, though, is not independent, isolated words. I mean, there's some of that, but obviously we can't teach every word in the English language. It's not possible. So the focus here, which is unlike most other reading programs that I've seen, is teaching kids to infer meaning. And the goal here is that students, when they come across a word they've never seen before, there's no teacher available, no one can tell them what that word is, that they have the skills to decode it, at least come up with what I call an alphabetic representation. It may not be exactly right if no one's ever said it for the child, but they get it in their brains. And then they are able to use both what we have what we call the inside the word and the outside the word strategy. They look inside at the morphographic and the base word information, and outside at context to come up with a meaning. And so we're really trying to teach students to infer based on using their background knowledge, using the knowledge of what's in the word itself to infer. And the research on vocabulary learning is pretty clear that most vocabulary that we learn actually comes from reading text, and typically there's no one there to tell us what the word means, and we figure that out by coming across these words again and again. And so we're going to teach the kids that directly. There are, of course, words that we do directly teach that are relevant to the text that they're reading right then, but more importantly, that they're learning how to infer. And I think you can see that if they're able to make these inferences, that's going to carry them further than learning specific individual words. And then the strategies, there's a focus on a building set of comprehension strategies, starting with narrative grammar, which comes from the previous level. We carry that into this second level. That story grammar then gets translated into how it applies to expository historical text. The kids are taught that history is really just a story that's true. And so they learn this idea of problem, solution, effect, which is part of the story grammar. And so those two are put side by side so they get that what's called a big idea. So that if you start understanding that history is really a story with a story grammar, and the characters had a problem that they set out to solve, and there was an effect from that, now you have history. So that's clearly taught. This idea of a main idea or getting the gist, we actually teach kids the gist at the paragraph level, which we call paragraph shrinking. They learn to shrink the content of that paragraph to 10 words or less, and then getting the gist is for a selection bigger than a paragraph. A lot of, that's supposed to be inference, not interference. I knew there'd be a typo in here somewhere. Okay, so that's supposed to say inference. Big emphasis on inference, and you're going to see a little vignette of how we introduce inferencing. And connecting that back to content knowledge that they already have, and you'll see that we ensure students have the background knowledge that they need to make inferences. And then the last thing that we really focus in on is webbing, which is based on main ideas. So it's superordinate, subordinate ideas that they web. And that starts out as teacher-led, and that again translates later into note-taking and planning out stories and such. Although the connections there are not part of this curriculum, but we're setting that foundation for future. So within this 120 lessons, it's set up in 3 books, and you'll see that there are placement assessments, and the placement assessments start students in book A, book B, or book C. Book A takes you back and covers content that should have been mastered in 1st grade. So my guess is that the vast majority of kids that are coming into 2nd grade this year will need book A. And some of them may actually fall back into the previous level. But there is an overlap between the end of the curriculum for 1st grade and the book A here. And so if they're in 2nd grade and they haven't mastered everything in 1st grade, but they're beyond the middle of 1st grade, they'll go right into this level. There may be some skills that teachers find that they need to create little extras for just to get them up to mastery on maybe a specific set of letter sounds or something. But for the most part, they should be good right here. Once the teacher is into this curriculum, what you're going to see is that there's repeating routines, because we want, not just for the teacher's sanity, but we want kids to fully integrate, create sort of a meta cognition in their brain about how they do things. So these routines are essentially how you approach words, how you approach paragraphs, how you approach text, etc. And so the teaching routines are also teaching the child their inner language of how to think about what they're doing. So these repeat. So that also makes teaching the curriculum easier, because there's going to be repetition of these routines, and once you learn the routine, you're good. However, there is a scaffolding process in which a routine in the beginning may have more steps, and then we drop steps out across. So the teachers do need to check to make sure something hasn't been dropped out as we hand over greater independence to the kids. There are a set of letter sound cards. Those are more repetition from the 1st level. In this level, there's an emphasis on like diphthongs, digraphs, vowel teams, etc. And so there's some additional cards that were not part of the original cards of those more advanced elements. And of course, we have a set of tricky word cards. A tricky word in this curriculum is just a word that doesn't work quite right. Kids are taught, though, that they can approach any word. They can try to, if they don't recognize a word as a tricky word, they can try to decode it. Usually it'll be close enough they can make the jump. So again, we're big emphasis on what we tell them to be flexible decoders and using inferencing for these grades. In terms of student materials, there is a student anthology, which is just it looks more like your traditional Basil with a set of stories in it. And that's where you find your more narrative text. Sometimes there's a narrative story that will start a unit and then they go over to the chapter books. But the majority of the reading is done in a set of chapter books, and the kids each get their own little book, chapter book, that makes them feel more adult. And then there's a workbook. And then we also have journals and such, but those are done just in regular spiral notebooks, like a word journal and such. So there's some additional materials, but that's using, you don't have to buy anything from SRA, you just need a spiral notebook to keep track of their vocabulary and such. Okay, so when students come out of this curriculum, here's the big deal. They will be able to decode basically any unknown vocabulary word. I mean, multisyllabic word. You're not going to have students who shut down because it's a big word. Because the student, and having to, I taught high school kids that couldn't read, they were like freaked out by big words. Well, a big word is really just a word with a bunch of syllables in it. And so once kids are taught to do syllabic, focus on the syllables, no word becomes undoable. We actually learned a lot from working, I learned a lot from working with Spanish speaking kids. And so we took some information that we learned from how students learn to read in Spanish, which is very syllabic, and applied it here to English and realized, because there's 6 syllable types in English and they are very consistent. And if kids learn to recognize the syllables, they can speed up. We never teach them the names of the syllables, but they do learn to recognize when there's a syllable, when there's when the vowel's long, when the vowel's short, if it's a vowel team, etc. And so, or E, consonant LE. They learn all that at a level of automaticity. We also teach them how to infer the meanings of any word. So if they hit a big word, they've never seen it before, it's multisyllabic, they will have a strategy for how to at least come up with an alphabetic approximation if they've never heard the word before, and then how to figure out the likely meaning of that word, which means that they will, in their features, be able to read text and figure out words with nobody's help. And that, I think we could all agree. Oh, look, I have another typo. I did this I did do this. I'm also in the middle of moving, just to tell you, so that I'm going to give myself an excuse for not catching these things, because things are a little crazy in my life right now. But that is supposed to be great. I will, Lindsay, I'm going to probably need to send you a corrected version of this before we send it out. Students are also then able to identify main ideas of paragraphs and larger. They're able to analyze narrative literature along with story grammar, which at the older grades we call plot structure. In particular, they're going to be really good at applying narrative text concepts to social studies in a way that probably they hadn't thought about. Many of us may not have thought about before. And it's very clear to these students how problem solution effect fits right into a story grammar. And then, of course, using expository text that's subordinate and superordinate structure using content webbing. So those are some of the big ideas of what they're able to do when they get out and do well. Now, in terms of the lesson designs here, it's one thing to talk about speeding the learning up for kids, and it's another thing how are the teachers supposed to really do this? It's a big undertaking, and so the curriculum that we've designed lays it all out for the teacher, like I said before. And so I consider it like the best friend. This teacher edition becomes your best friend in the classroom because you're not like figuring out how am I supposed to do this. We've already done the heavy lifting on what are the critical contents and how do you get kids from point A to point Z in this case. And so at the beginning of every lesson, you will see that we have clearly specified objectives. And that within each lesson, there's usually 5 to 8 activities. There's 8, there's a lot of really quick ones. It's not just one lesson on one topic. Kids are going from multiple strands, and often there'll be little activities that build into a bigger activity, or we're building background knowledge before, and they go through some vocabulary before we read a text. And so the lessons are laid out. It also lays out all of the different materials that you need for that lesson that day. So it tells you can, before you sit down to teach the lesson, you know what you're supposed to have. And sometimes it's right there in the book, and sometimes it's like like you're going to need a globe or a map for this one. You're going to need that. You need some chart paper. The word journal is that's not provided by SRA McGraw-Hill. That's just a spiral and a marker board. So it's making sure you have everything you need. Also, you'll see in this particular lesson, we have building background, which means that we're going to be reading a story. And so we've got some things to help you with that for how to make sure kids have the background knowledge they need in order to operate on this new text in a way that is will help. And this particular lesson, there is a mastery assessment. So about every 10 lessons, there's an assessment that where we check to make sure that the kids aren't forgetting stuff. And if they are forgetting, it tells you what you need to do next. There is a scope and sequence, and I'm not going to go through this whole thing with you, but if the teacher is unclear about what's going on in a lesson, you just need to look at the script, the scope and sequence, which is laid out by lesson, and new stuff is added. So if there's something brand new in that lesson, like in lesson 81, you can see that we're getting a brand new introduction of the morphograph or the prefix pro and what that means. It'll tell you what the new vocabulary words. If it's a high impact word, it means it's being taught directly. And we did determine that these are words that are likely to show up in textbooks later in life. So it's a good thing to go ahead and teach them directly. It tells you what the book are. And you can see if there's a star, it means we're doing that activity that day. There's a new activity that goes along with that day. So they're going to be writing and spelling words, probably with pro in it. And then you can see over here with there's going to be a fluency activity with a text, and there's going to be a set of strategies. So you can see for every lesson what's going to happen that's new in that lesson across the entire 120 lessons. Now, this is something that SRA McGraw-Hill did for us after we actually put this program together, and I was so excited when you guys presented this to me, when SRA McGraw-Hill presented this to me. So because we take such a focus on background knowledge and making sure we're building this knowledge, not just for this curriculum, but also to make sure that we're facilitating our students' ability to do well in future content area classes. So all of these, the kind of stories that we are reading here all relate to what is in the general ed curriculum in the next level of grades. And we're going to teach students how to connect to their background knowledge to make inferences. So it's very important we have this background. We can't do these lessons if we don't know the kids have the background knowledge. So SRA McGraw-Hill went in and made little videos for us around the different content pieces that are in these chapter books. And a chapter book essentially becomes like a unit. And so when you go to Connect Ed, which is an SRA McGraw-Hill, their technology support platform, there's a lot of tools in Connect Ed that you get a subscription to when the curriculum is purchased for a teacher, or for a classroom, and then teachers are given subscriptions to log in. So I wanted to share, I'm not going to show you here, but I did want to show you that this is what it looks like. You go into the resource library, and they have background videos, and the videos are set up by the content in these various books, and the titles are, that's how the titles are set up in the curriculum. We're gonna do a unit now basically on texts, stories, and things that have to do with ecosystems. And so before we go into ecosystems, there's a video, and then it goes through and talks about deserts and mountains and all the different ecosystems that we do. And so that was very helpful. I know there's a series of stories that we do on the Grand Canyon, and kids are always like, what's it, I thought every kid should know what the Grand Canyon is, but obviously they don't unless they live in Arizona or something. And so they get to see the Grand Canyon in these videos before we have to read about the Grand Canyon. And it's very hard to describe. We were showing pictures, but these actually have videos with the plane flying over, the helicopters flying over, so the kids get it. And when we're doing this with just pictures, it's very hard to understand what you're really looking at. So it really, you see light bulbs going off. I like the one with the transportation in the United States, where they get to see like old trains and such. And we can't assume that these kids have any context in terms of history and such. So it really adds a nice dimension. Now, these are not long videos. They're very short. They're designed to be done right before, you would show a video to make sure the kids understand what you're talking about. You discuss it a little bit and then go right into the lesson. So it's a very helpful tool, depending on how much background knowledge your sets of kids have. Now, I want to talk a little bit about assessment, because this assessment process is going to help you figure out which kids need what in the beginning, who should be placed together, and then also to track how kids are progressing and if you need to do some reshuffling. The curriculum was designed to be done in small groups. Now, I will tell you that we have done some modifications on that in our research. So if you are wanting to do this with larger groups, larger than say 8, we do have some strategies for modifying, but you would want to contact me directly to get some additional training on that. But it was designed with the idea of small groups, and the lower functioning the sets of kids that we're working with, the smaller the group. Kids that are, just missed the end of school last year, they're probably not really struggling or wouldn't have been super strugglers, but they are behind, can be done in a little larger group. But the larger the group, the less one-on-one attention each kid's going to get. We also find that these lessons work better in small group rather than one-on-one, because there's a dynamic where the kids listen to each other, because there's a lot of answering together, and if one kid's slightly off but they hear the answer, they repeat. It seems to take some of the stress off. So small group is actually, we're finding, is actually more effective than one-on-one. But 3 to 5 if you've got really low functioning, and we're thinking, I'm just estimating 8-ish maybe for kids that aren't quite as low, but still need to speak, they're still behind. So the placement test, which I will show you what that looks like in just a second, is laid out. Basically, can the kids do these skills? And then it will tell you, place the kid level 1, less than 20, 40, 60, 80, whatever, or let's level 2. So the very first page lets you know if the kid is appropriate for this level, this upper level, or if they need to, or if you need to consider creating a group of kids in the previous level. Then once they're into the lessons, every single lesson, the teacher is, we call it, it's a mastery sheet. And when the group masters activity, we put a star or a check mark, and the kids get a real, they love this. Like the teacher's a check mark on the mastery sheet, and the kids, yay. If a student is, if all of them make the fluency goals, we put yes. If there's a problem, if a student, let's say one student in a group didn't really master something, you have a little place to quickly note, or if a child didn't make the fluency goal, that might be a child you pull aside and try to get them where they need to be so they're good to go. But just having that focus on always knowing whether or not children are mastering things day to day ensures greater levels of mastery. And then we're testing to make sure they're maintaining. So you're teaching to mastery every day. And if we didn't get to mastery, you might go in and reteach. And those teachers that have tenacity, that really stick with it and really get, realize that they may not have gotten it today, but they'll get there if I do it again. And typically it doesn't take kids more than 2 days on a skill. And remember, these lessons have little chunks of skills. So if they're having trouble today on something, it's a small piece. And tomorrow it's often there. And then we're maintaining mastery. And if students are losing mastery, if after 5 to 10 lessons, there's usually an assessment. It varies across the curriculum how often it shows up. But the mastery test, if a student isn't maintaining mastery, it tells you to go back and repeat these things. So it gives some guidance there. For students who maybe they had mastery, but they forgot. I know that's shocking to you. We have kids that forget, right? And so we're constantly ensuring that kids are what we call firm, that they were firm and they maintained their firmness in terms of the skills that are taught. And then I said there were routines that teachers that repeat themselves over and over and over again throughout the curriculum. But the first time a teacher teaches any of these routines, it can feel a little awkward, and or maybe they're not quite sure how the routine's supposed to look. Well, SRA has made a set of videos for you that present every routine that is presented in this curriculum has a video. Obviously, not every lesson is presented, but all the routines, so you can see what a routine is supposed to look like and what the steps of the routine are. And also, when there's a new routine in a lesson, it will be it's it's up there in that box that has the objectives. It'll tell you this is a new routine. So you have the ability before, if you're preparing to teach this and you're not sure what that routine really looks like, you should go through and read. We ask the teachers to read the script, but they can also go and look at it before they ever teach it, which is very useful. So there's essentially a sort of a coach on demand where you can see what it's supposed to look like. And those videos are all located again in the Connected Ed, which you go into this and you end up in what we call the teaching tutor. And I'm going to go into the teaching tutor in just a little bit, and we'll get to see some of these videos. But I think this is one of the most helpful things ever, because anytime anybody adopts a new curriculum, it's overwhelming. Yes, we recommend that teachers get face-to-face instruction on the front end, but we all know that you go to that, you come out of that going, what did they say? I certainly had that experience of getting in the classroom and going, oh, I know they talked about this, but it's not working for me. I must be doing something wrong. And so the videos really can help there, even if there's no instructional coach helping. And so within this teaching tutor, you'll see that it's set up by chapters, and the chapters actually just go through what's in the staff development book. So a teacher could literally teach themselves how to do this curriculum simply by going through the chapters. The last chapter then has a video library of everything, that all of the routines that are used in the curriculum. And so I am going to go over, if I can figure out how to get out of this. This is what I need, 2 screens. Okay, so I'm gonna go into the teaching tutor now and show you some of this. So the first thing I wanted to do very quickly, and I want to leave some time for questions. So I've got a clock here in case you wonder what I'm looking at. So I'm running out of time. So I'm going to just do this very quickly, but I wanted to give you a sense of what you get. So so I'll just go into a chapter here, and this is what the actual presentation of staff development looks like.
Dr. Mathes, can you reshare? We're just seeing that gray box right now.
Oh, okay.
Acquired through the use of multiple word learning strategies.
Stop. Hold on. Thank you for reminding me. Share my screen. Can you see it now?
Sure can.
Okay, very good. Yes, it'd be very bad to be looking only at a gray screen right now. All right, so so I'm going to go into and just show you what it looks like for a teacher.
Knowledge is acquired through the use of multiple word learning strategies. SRA Early Interventions in Reading, Level 2, provides direct vocabulary instruction. The focus is on high-impact words. Words students will likely see and use regularly, both inside and outside the program materials, and contextualized vocabulary. Words that are important to comprehending a selection, but that do not warrant direct vocabulary instruction. Vocabulary instruction also is achieved through the teaching of morphographs and their meanings. Starting in Teacher's Edition A, vocabulary instruction includes instances of contextualized vocabulary. When students encounter a selected contextualized vocabulary word, discuss the meaning of the word. If they don't know what the word means, use context clues in the selection to help students define the word. Vocabulary instruction also consists of high-impact words, which are usually introduced in a 3-step process. First, students read the words using the chunking format.
Which is a multisyllabic
For very
strategy.
difficult words, read the word and then have students read the word. Second, you use sentence context to define the word. Third, students write the words in their word journals. During a reading activity, students then raise their hands when they read the words they've written in their word journals and discuss how the words are used. To see a demonstration video, choose the appropriate link below and click the play arrow on the video.
So after that content, the teacher then is able to go right into a video that shows how something is happening. I think this video is actually me teaching.
Okay, we're going to practice reading some
With shorter hair.
words that are going to be in the chapter that we're going to read in just a little bit. First, we will read the underlined syllable, and then we will read the entire word fast. Get ready. Read the first part.
Shelter.
Read the next part.
Shelter.
Read the whole word.
Shelter.
Good job. Read the first part.
Maze.
Read the next part.
Maze.
Read the next part.
Amazing.
Read the whole word.
Amazing.
Good job. And you flexed that really well because you said A and you said amazing. We really say that word amazing. Good job. Okay, read this part.
Seek.
Read the whole word.
Seek.
Now that's a funny one because it's a one syllable word. So there's only one part to read. Next word, read the first part.
Can.
Read the next part.
Can.
Read the whole word.
Canyon.
Good job. Okay, now we're going to talk about what these words mean. What was this word?
Shelter.
Excellent job. Now, a shelter is a place to stay safe. Here's an example. The man went inside his house to stay safe in the wind and rain. Can you say that sentence with the other word, our new word, shelter? Here, I'll say the sentence again. The man went inside his house to stay safe from the wind and rain. Brianna, can you say that sentence with the new word?
The man went inside his shelter from the wind and rain.
Good. Yes, the man went inside his shelter to stay safe from the wind and rain. That was very good. Leo, that was a hard one. You did really well on that. Okay.
I'm gonna stop it because it keeps going for a little bit, but it gives you an idea of what's in the videos. And so the videos are dropped in within each chapter, which has to do with the different the different strands of instruction. And then at the end, there's an entire library that again repeats. And I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to just move to one. Let's do one on reading. I have a series of videos I was going to show you, but to save time, you get the idea here that this video library is here. And so so this is text reading in lessons 61 through 66. So we can see what level they are halfway through the program and what that would look like. And text reading really is focused on, it incorporates word reading, vocabulary, and fluency and comprehension.
In the previous lesson, we met Ming Ming, a young girl from China, and Paula, a young girl from San Diego. They're pen pals. We learned some things about Ming Ming's home and Paula's home last time. Can you remember what we learned? We can use the chart to help us remember. Well, do you remember some of the things we learned about Ming Ming?
So what you're seeing in this video is they're reading a chapter book, and so they're in the process. And so we're also teaching, it's not just one little short reading. They're learning that to maintain knowledge from day to day to day. So they're in the middle of reading a chapter book here. So we're referring back to information that was collected on previous days.
Ming's home? What?
That she had to have smaller families.
Very good. That was very good. We have that up there.
There are 2 million people in Kowloon.
Very good. Do you remember anything from the story, Kimberly? You can use a chart to help you.
Zoo has cages.
Right. The zoos had cages in China. And what are the zoos like in our country where Paula lives?
The animals roam free.
They roam free. Can you think of anything else from the story that you remember?
It was much smaller in China, but there was more people.
Right. It is a little bit smaller there. Very good. This is a name you will read in a chapter. The name is Mongkok. What name?
Mongkok.
What name?
Mongkok.
Good job. Now we're going to read the second chapter of our book. Let's read the title of the chapter.
What is your family like?
Good job reading the title. Based on the title, what do you think this chapter is going to be about?
The 2 girls' mother letters, and they're gonna figure out about their families.
Right, about their families. Anybody else? Have any ideas what it will be about?
They get to learn more about their families.
Very good, Alondra. Kimberly, do you have any idea from the title?
To find out how their family's like.
Very good. Very good. Okay, now let's see if any of our predictions will come true. When I call on you, read until I tell you to stop. Try to read as fast as you can without making a.
Okay, again, because of time, I'm going to cut that short. But what happens next is each kid reads basically a paragraph. They stop and do a paragraph shrinking or identifying the main idea, and they go through the storybook that way. At the end, they're going to come back and do either add to their notes or do a content web, or there'll be something done with that. There may also be a fluency check where the teacher would time one student and the other students would do what we call beat the clock, where they read with each other in a certain amount of time. So I'm going to pull you out of the teaching tutor. I think you get an idea of what that is like. I also wanted to show you briefly other things that are in the online, the Ed Connect or Connect Ed. So you see the teaching tutor, which is what we were just in. There's also a set of, I think it's logged me out. The materials that are delivered online are also, what are delivered in the books, you have an online version of it. So you're able to actually, here we go, online board materials. So if you're doing this with a larger group of students, or you just want to use the presentation on a smart board, come on, let me go. Everything is there for smartboard presentation. It's pretty slick, actually. And it occurs to me that in this time when we're doing online lessons with all of our kids, we could actually use this, these set of, I just happened to do a web here, so it's wanting to, so anyway, we could actually do this online with kids if we needed to. Using the set of tools. It would be a little harder to check for mastery, but we could still do a decent job there through various tools. Let me go back to this. Let me bring up a different one. So everything that's presented out online, here we go. Here's a new morphograph. So we're presenting the morphograph age or ADGE in this case, use EDGE, village. And so kids are learning to read that chunk. And so the teacher, this is presented in the presentation book, which is very good if you're working with a very small group. But if you're moving to a larger group and the kids can't all see it, you can go to the electronic board and present it on a whiteboard or a large computer screen. So I just thought that was a very useful set of tools there. Additionally, anything that you, the assessment guides, actually all the lessons are online, even the parts that you do, the kids don't need to see. But if you let's say you're at home, let's say you leave your teacher edition at home, you can just bring it up on the computer and still teach it. You just read it off the screen. So it can be delivered in other ways other than just strictly paper pencil. And that's really everything I have today. The big takeaway I want to make sure I've emphasized, and I think I have emphasized it, but one more time to emphasize it, is that when the students leave this 120 lessons, which should be very doable in an academic year, actually, if the kids are speeding through it, you may be able to get this far in half a year. But 120 lessons in 180 school days is a very doable deal. And if they've mastered the content at 120 lessons, we know that they will be reading at about a beginning 4th grade level, and perhaps even better because now they have such good, in terms of like word reading, what you're going to see is kids are phenomenal. They can basically take any word on, and they have some strategies for figuring out the word. We've built background knowledge as well that gives them a better understanding about the world at large, which facilitates comprehension of their textbooks as well, and also literature, traditional narrative literature, but specifically focused on making sure that they have the skills they need to achieve well, not just in their English language arts classes, but also in their other content area classes. With this focus here in this particular curriculum being the social studies, humanities kinds of content. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to turn off sharing my screen and we'll go to questions.
Sure, yeah, we had a few come in. So I think you already alluded to it, but modifying for digital delivery. So mentioning the board displays, having all the additional content online for teachers, and just making sure that the kids get their digital, or excuse me, their print textbooks to where they need to be and being able to conduct that lesson. Okay, so there were a few other ones. I have 3 here. So can you tell us more about the morphology? I'm having a hard time pronouncing morphology exercises, please.
Okay, I'm not sure exactly what, and when you say more about in terms of the, I'm not quite sure what aspect of that. Teach, what I will say is that every morphograph, really morphographs start in level 1 because when you make something plural or an ed, they come in with those ed, ing, those initial ones. There is some discussion that you really don't need to start teaching morphology till like 3rd grade, but we don't see a reason why you should just go ahead and start when they start reading these words. So they learn, we do start with the more simpler ones, but so not every morphograph in the world is taught through this program, but they come away knowing things like pre, and you saw pro, un, dis, leap, re, re, all of them. Every time morphograph is taught directly, they're taught to decode it first. And ones like TION, they're taught that one doesn't work quite right in terms of the alphabet principle, but they learn to recognize it. And they're taught what it means when they add it to a word. Then what happens is we do a lot of word play activities where word building, where we'll have a base word and the teacher will say, now write that word with read. What does it mean now? And so there's a lot of word so playing around with base words, and there's some activities where the teacher will say take off read and add dis. It would depend on the word if that would work, but you get the idea. And so they can take off, so there's playing with a base word and adding different elements or taking away elements, and what does the word mean now? And so you'll see some of those activities.
Great, I'm getting a thumbs up on that one. Okay, can you talk more about chunking?
Okay, so we call it chunking. Kids like that word. It's not probably the most professional word for a strategy, but it's the concept. Where basically take a chunk is essentially a syllable unit, and so kids are taught to decode just a chunk at a time, or essentially a syllable, which has a syllable. They're actually taught explicitly in the beginning elements or the beginning section of this curriculum what a syllable is, and a syllable must have a vowel. And there's some exercises where they identify the chunk or the syllable, and we call it scooping because we already have underlines under the whole syllable unit. So they're supposed to draw their little scoop where the vowel sound is, and the vowel sound. They're also taught to recognize that the vowel sound, which is one sound, may be represented by multiple letters. So they draw their scoop around the letters that represent the sound, and they get very good at recognizing where those units are. Initially, the chunks are always underlined by the teacher or in the book. Later in the curriculum, the kids are asked to put their own chunk underlines under the words, and then they're taught to. Then they learn to quickly decode the chunk, read it. So we call sound out the chunk, read it, sound out to read it, sound out, read the whole word, and they become very, very good at doing this. And one of the things we learn from Spanish readers is Spanish spends a lot of time doing speeded syllable drills. Well, we should be doing that too, because we need them to just read each chunk, boom, 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 and read the whole word. Kids come out of this no longer, there is no fear of big words when kids come out of this program. And I actually was a professor at a medical school once for just a brief time. I was completely misplaced there, but it was interesting because I got sent medical students. These are very smart people who, these were the medical students who were really struggling reading their textbooks because they didn't know how to multisyllabic chunk. And you know what I was doing with them? Teaching them how, because medical words are like, oh my God, some of them. But if you really get into them, lots of morphographs, so a lot of scientific morphographs, repeat. And they're often just big, long chunks of these same elements. And once I taught those students, they didn't tune into this. we're teaching kids these strategies long before medical school. And I hope our kids get to go to medical school. That's our goal, is that at least if they want to go to medical school, they can go to medical school.
Right. So we just have one more question. What skills are checked on the assessments?
Okay, so the assessments vary depending on what new content was being taught. And I'm focusing in on the mastery assessments that occur every 10 lessons. So the content that was new in that last chunk of lessons, last 5 or 10, depending on how long, and we're just assessing to make sure that students are remembering it, that they're able to maintain what was just things that were taught. And if they forgot something or they're not quite firm, the lessons, after they do an assessment, depending on what is missed, it tells the teacher, go back and review this. That's my alarm telling me we're done. We're not actually done, but I just did that so I wouldn't keep y'all. So I will talk for years if I get done.
Okay. And it looks like, does the placement test identify students' reading levels or just identify reading skills students have not mastered?
What it tells you is where they're going to place, where the most appropriate starting place point. And when we designed this, knowing that we were designing curriculum for students that were struggling, we knew that you could assume that they had all the prerequisite knowledge for the grade level, nor could we assume that we start at the beginning. And so the levels are set up that you start them on the lesson that is most appropriate for where that child is. Once you give the placement test, then you're able to group students into these lessons according to the same starting point.
Great. Okay, and one more. What is the measure that determines a student is reading on the 4th grade level after completing the program?
Okay, so we based that on actual assessments on like the Woodcock-Johnson, and because in our research studies we were doing a whole barrage of assessments, but I loosely based that on grade equivalency on primarily a Woodcock-Johnson or a Woodcock-Munoz or whatever test it was that we were giving. The Woodcock. It was where we could say that they were scoring typically above grade level. And so if you're a 2nd grade, if at the end of 2nd grade you're reading on approximately 4th grade level, you're above grade level. And then we're also able to look at the fluency levels. And you'll see one thing I didn't mention is that there are very clear markers throughout the curriculum where when I think I mentioned the teacher measures one student while the other's doing a partner read. The teacher will measure one student in a lesson, and we're constantly getting fluency measures. And each lesson will tell you how fast, what the minimum requirement is for every storybook. So at the end of this curriculum, students should be reading text that is associated with about a 4th grade readability level at about 99 words per minute minimum. That's what the marker is for the end of the program. And I think average reading is a little higher, but we've done some, you really want them reading about 120 words per minute. But we also know that if students can hit about a 99 word per minute, they're good. Because fluency is one of those things where you don't have to be the fastest reader in the class. You just have to be fluent enough. And so we're finding that for those kids that still struggle a little bit with fluency, if we can get them up to around 100 words per minute, they're probably going to be okay, even though we're teaching them to go faster.
Great.
And if they're below that, they're going to be struggling to a point where reading the textbook just becomes onerous. So we set it up that we know we have to get them to this benchmark to get to where they can be viable and okay. And if they can get better than that, great.